You got me? Hey, Dave. Hello.
Okay, I think we're pretty much ready to begin. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Zoe Rodriguez. I'm the Vice President of PEN Sydney and the Chair of PEN International's Women Writers Committee, but most importantly for tonight, I am the poet's daughter of the book that's being launched, The Feather Boy and Other Poems. I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land that we're gathered on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the first storytellers of our land. I would also like to acknowledge the great poets, including of course David Malouf, Robert Adamson, Adam Aitken, Deborah Adelaide, who have all agreed to read poems from Mum's book because unfortunately she can't be with us tonight to read herself. So I also very much want to acknowledge that PEN Sydney is extremely grateful to have a wine sponsor for tonight. We are being well refreshed by the Cherry Tree Hill Winery of the Lorentz people. We're very grateful. Thank you so much. And we meet on the eve of the day of the International Day of the Imprisoned Writer. Tomorrow we will have a lecture that will be given by Melissa Lukashenko to mark that date. But after tonight we will have card signing to write to 5 writers we've selected who are imprisoned around the Asia Pacific, and we stretch that to Turkey and to Saudi Arabia, as well as Vietnam, China and Australia. And of course that brings me to the empty chair that we have here. The empty chair symbolises a writer who is imprisoned and cannot be with us. For us, and for as long as Behrouz Booshani is on Manus Island, effectively imprisoned, though he's marooned, I suppose, now, he will be the empty chair for us at events. He's a Kurdish-Iranian journalist, poet, writer, who is there for what he has written. Many of you will know that he has published No Friend But the Mountain, which he wrote on his mobile phone from Manus Island. PEN Sydney and PEN International and PEN centres around the world are advocating for his immediate release from Manus, and we want him to be accepted as an asylum seeker in Australia. So, anyway, that's the formal PEN stuff. The order of things for tonight: we will have the formal launch of The Feather Boy and Other Poems by Judith Rodriguez that David Malouf will do. He will then read several poems from the collection, and then will be followed by the poets I mentioned before, who will read selected poems from the book. Wonderfully, the publisher is here tonight, Puncher and Watman, represented by Andy there, and there will be, the books are there and available for purchase at $20 a copy, which is a real bargain. You get a discount because it's at a book launch, not in a bookstore. So now I'm going to hand over to David, who needs absolutely no introduction in this room. He's one of our foremost writers. David, thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. Great to see you all here. I'm sure Judith will be very pleased with that. Sorry she's not here. But she will be here in presence in the poems, absolutely. So to begin with, congratulations to David Musgrave and Puncher and Watman for yet another important and meticulously prepared and presented publication. I'm sure I don't have to remind you what a significant contribution they've made over this last decade and more to poetry and fiction publishing on the local scene. Tonight, Judith's book, The Feather Boy. In the 70s and 80s, after the publication as Judith C. Green of her first collection in 4 poets in 1962, Judith published 3 much admired collections, each with her own very striking liner cut illustration. And you might notice that the cover of this book also has a liner cut illustration, unmistakably Judith. Those books were New Plastic Fanfare Red, Water Life, and Mud Crabs at Gambaros. And then in 1988, she published a selected poems called House by Water. All those volumes were with the University of Queensland Press. So one way of looking at this new book, The Feather Boy, with its uncollected earlier poems and gathering up of some shorter collections that she's published in these later years, is to see it as a very substantial selected poems volume 2 that offers readers a rich picture of how Judith's later work has developed and deepened, but most of all allows us to see at last what a coherent body of work her poems make, and how she has remained, over 60 years now, one of the most significant voices of her generation. From the beginning, a boldly independent woman with a warm heart and a cold eye, speaking up and speaking out in both a public and a private way, increasingly politically engaged, but engaged as well in the conflicts and contradictions, the comforts and crosses of family living over what is now an extended lifetime. Earlier this year, she was 82. Judith and I go back almost 70 years to a shared childhood in Brisbane, an education in brother and sister grammar schools there in the 40s, and the arts faculty at the University of Queensland in the 50s, along with what in one of these poems Judith calls our other university, the weekly Saturdays of poetry, ballad nights, and other music making. Judith and I were both violinists at Kate and John Manifold's down at Wynnum, where Judith, at least, as she puts it in one of the poems here, learned that living must be political. Music and poetry is a slow, deep politics. I call the world we grew up in shared, but shared experience is not the same experience. It's too deeply inflected by how the sharers see and feel things, by individual circumstance and temperament. When in 1962, along with Rodney Hall, another graduate of Manifolds, and Don Maynard and I, published a shared volume, 4 poets, Judith's collection was called A Question of Ignorance, Mine Interiors. Titles that pointed more accurately than either of us could at that point have guessed to where our later writings would go. The present collection comes in 4 parts, the first of which reflects Judith's deep involvement over the past 30 years in the public area of human rights and individual responsibility for the world we find ourselves in. Her work, for example, as Australia's representative to International PEN. This is a poet for whom living must be political. And I'm going to read one of the poems. It's called There Are No Words for This. In this first part of the book, it's one of 7 poems called Vote Voices. This one is called There Are No Words for This. Let the young man hang. Let children lose their trust. Let them despair and run amok and send them back. Let the woman lose hold of her child on the deep among known bodies. Let oceans take as flotsam these lives. 1835, a captain, saved, leaves his ship full of women to drown off Boulogne. Not one alive, taken off. His orders being to land them in New South Wales. What's changed? Let oceans take them, or slavers, or years damn them. It's simple, they're different. Plus, illegals. They chose their fates. There are no words for it. There are words for it. Human waste. And the words for us? Part 2 of The Feather Boy offers us 7 versions of poems from the Colombian Spanish, so impressively at home with themselves in English that it's hard to think of them as what we normally call translations, and prepares for the celebration of friends and family in parts 3 and 4, with 2 tributes to fellow writers. Elizabeth Jolly, in a wonderfully comic poem, and in one of the most moving poems in this collection, to Kath Walker, Ujuru, and her home at Montgalba on Stradbroke Island. Adam Aiken will read one of those Colombian poems, so you'll hear what I mean by their not sounding at all like translations. And I'm going to read the very first of the Moongalba poems about Kath Walker. And Deborah will read a longer second one. This first poem I've chosen to read particularly because it begins with a quite wonderful picture of life at the Manifolds in the 50s, which is where Judith first met. Finding the page. Where Judith first met Kath Walker. And I would just say, if you'll excuse me, what we did at those ballad nights there was we either played Baroque music or we played arrangements of Australian ballads. So it was a ballad night, but it was also a night for sort of being given out music, and we'd play away at our Haydn or whatever it was. And a lot of those ballads were later printed by John Manifold, and a couple of them I think he really wrote. And one of them is referred to in this poem, and if you don't mind, I'll just sing for you. The words of it, because it may be a ballad you don't know. And it's called Old Black Alice. And it goes, Old Black Alice is my name, well shot is my station. There's no disgrace in the old black face. It's the banner of my nation. So bindi eye, watch your eye, and don't kick up a shindy. I've got a boy in Gundy Guy and another in Gundawindi. And then the background went, rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. And it went dum da dum da dum 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 dum. That's referred to in this poem. And it's a good indication of what the ballad nights at John's were like, and what John was like, as you'll see in this poem. Arriving at Moongalba, remembering Udridu Nunakal. I remember you, Kath, the quiet woman, sat with Kate on a bench at Manifolds. Our mandolins, those Saturdays, the Wynnum River flats, a hawk circling, the ballads scored for guitar, violin, recorder, lagerphone. Oh, friends, still lit and live 60 years on. John, full-throated, hailing the comrades in, workers, students, blacks, but it wasn't your scene. Just a few times I fronted your shy smile, your frank laughter. Slim woman in a pleated skirt, surely Black Alice's jolly sneers snagged your pride. Being bossed to play, even friendly bossing, stirred a century's hurt. Your cause and your course clear. You were off through the weatherboard suburbs to the bay and out to the islands, your people waiting there in want of words, you with the words to say. And the third part of that, Deborah will read to you. Between 1960 and 1964, when I was teaching in London and Birkenhead, and Judith was a student at Cambridge and then a lecturer at a teachers' college in London called Philippa Fawcett, we exchanged letters 2 or 3 times a week in those days of letter writing, and often met up at weekends and travelled together in Austria, Italy, and Greece. So there are a few periods since when we've not lived in close proximity or communicated regularly. So few of the writers and others who appear and are paid tribute to in the 3rd and 4th parts of The Feather Boy were not also close friends of mine. Rex Cramphorn, Wodie Whiten, Ken Campbell-Dobby, Cass Walker, Loris Edmonds. And of course I've known all of Judith's children, 3 Wells and Ansel here, for most of their lives. It's a great tribute to these poems and to Judith's amazing unpredictability, that I find them, as well as being strikingly eloquent and moving, so often surprising and challengingly paradoxical. The paradox, of course, is Judith herself. The paradox of someone so utterly dismissive of all aspects of domesticity, of housekeeping and boring household routine, who, as the poems reveal across a wide span of years and even a broader range of complex and contradictory responses, devotes herself to the family ties of marriage and the long drawn-out care, as we see in the later part of poetry, of a demanding and mostly disapproving and inescapable parent. This poem is a poem about marriage, very short, very to the point, called The Score. My tiny thoughts are second-rate. He reads his watch. I'm always late. I ride the clutch. I spoil the kids. I clean too much. I always did. Can't cook for nuts. Can't dress. Can't save. Can't give the love his mother gave. My friends a laugh. My work a sham. I've got no sense, but I've got him. How brave I am. And just 3 lines on her daughters. Again, a wonderful moment of understanding. They're my insiders, the ones who know what I mean by cleaning or silence. And finally, this poem towards the end of the book, about the years that Judith spent, and they were years, caring for her mother, who died at 103. 103. It's called Safe. My mother is crouching at the back of her mind. She has not many ideas to go on. Her interests have faded. Her sisters are gone. It is long since she securely recognised the daily carers, daughter and granddaughter. She rouses to rummage the cupboards, all hers, for anything to do. Snatches a cleaning rag, sticky tape, cards she can't read. Asked, she says she wants scissors. Asked why, she does not stay to answer. Wakeful, she has left her walking frame. Tape tangles her fingers. It is 4:30 in the night, and nothing in her indomitable body or her own warm home will be allowed to kill her. That's the last from me. You'll hear from other readers. Judith, the Feather Boy, I hope, is duly launched. Thank you all.
Robert, maybe you could come next. And I forgot to say the very brief message from my mother. I spoke to her this afternoon and she said she is so sad not to be among great friends who are here tonight, some lifelong friends. And she especially wanted me to thank David. She said, how marvellous of you to launch her book and how marvellous of you to think about other people reading her poems for her. Incredibly thoughtful. And in case you didn't know, we're actually filming it. My brother Ensor is here, so that we can show it to her, as well as hopefully put it up on the Penn Sydney website. So, thank you.
Hello, Judith. I noticed I was arrested by Judith's poems right back in maybe 1969. I think I had a copy of that book David mentioned, Four Poets. And then, of course, New Plastic Fanfare Red was a wonderful book at the time, and some of my fellow poets, Vicky Viticus was one, very impressed and influenced by that book, as I was. I'm just going to read one poem, The Virgil. You smell out Karen, stench of waterweed and stagnant bilge, the dusk laden with rumour from the countless poled crossings, regret and dread, the beckoning shadow, the boatman's hooded scrutiny. So here you hover, peering through the blinds, a kid on a date, for the classical walk to the ferry, and gawk at this gigolo, bad teeth and painted grin, struts up to the neighbour's door, hails the unwary fool from behind it. It's him. He stood you up. There they go, joining the night world, down to the jetty, lip to lip, arm in arm, off to their games. Yours is the lot to follow with hobbled step, or sit and peer as the ferryman's manifest turns, page after page, but not to read the names. Thank you.
Deborah, did you want to go next?
Thanks, Zoe. I'm afraid Zoe promoted me to the status of poet. I'm not a poet, I'm not in that exalted company. I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations, Judith, and it's an honour to be asked to read a couple of her poems. So the first poem I'm going to read is from the early part of the book, and it's called Some Politicians. To have preached even for a moment that money matters more than the good it buys, to have proclaimed the end of caring, to have unmothered the state and left orphans to the wind, to have waged phony battle on the homeless and fugitive, the needy come to our door, to have danced on a tally of the drowned, to have pursued the desperate for electoral triumph. These are your names on the seabed at our shore gate, behind razor wire, among the fatherless, the trapped and the destitute, and among the separated families. So the second poem I'm going to read, as David mentioned, is from this long, lovely poem about Udjuru Nunakul called Arriving at Noongalba. I'm going to read from the section called Udjuru. Mysteriously, the Nunakul persevere. Years of rules, prayer, lessons, labour. Still, the children trap bandicoot, go crabbing, bring down birds like the old folk time out of mind. The fishers of dugong harvest the tides, scavenge timber cast up in the mangroves. Later, a crumbling slope of sand. The bay swallows boats and kiosks, scours the shoreline. Amity's heart beats on. After the war, the ferry's back to wake the bush retreat of loners, misfits, missioners, handymen and their women, making do, running the post, the bakery, the new hall, the holiday cabins, improvising a community. Maiora, they call the mission, but the blacks reach back to the real name. And dads tell their kids the indigenous creation, the discipline of kinship with snake and curlew. Language wears away, but the names go on, and stories nest in the people. In city offices, there are children who've run from bunyip in the dark, who know a great love clothed the silky oak, whose mission names hardly fit, like young Kath. After the freedom buses, the referendum, after the first Indigenous cession of land, after the Yeardses maid, stenographer, after the poems critics called naive, uneducated, wisdom they'd had no ears for, the girl, named for paperbark, crosses the bay, returns to kin and country, claims her name. Thank you.
Adam. Oh, he's gone all digital on us.
Hi, Judith. I'd just like to say I'm eternally grateful to Judith, as she was one of the first editors I knew when I was starting my poetry career, and she gave me a bit of a start in Mianjin. But she is also a great friend of my mother's and my father, and she knew my father. I'm going to read one of a translation, a poem translated from the Spanish of Oscar Echeverri Mejia, is that what you say? An Excursion, some Colombian poems, and this is the first of the series. The moveless sea of the Llanos. You don't have to tell me it's the sea. That I knew, from the herons dreaming of their sails, from the palm grove islands lifting their tall masts. I sensed it from the horizon holding the sky up on arms of mist, from the sun sinking to die in arms the anguished sea of grass, and the sun rising, reborn like a great sea beacon. You don't have to tell me it's the sea. I felt it in the hot waves of pasture that invade the beaches, like a crazed great vegetable tongue, in the wind's murmur tasting of salt, in the little streams that creep through the plain and pour out their waters, in the sea gulf of the Meta, in the strange siren songs, ships, sirens, and sirens of flesh and bone. You hear there in the night, in the shipwreck of things living and not living, every sunset. I know it now. It is sea. I asked for no proofs, seeing how the meta drowns in its huge waves, how the plainsman steers among its endless currents and stays afloat, how the young bull, miraculous amphibian, nibbles stars in its crystalline glass, how the horse runs on through its ecstatic waves of green, with his mane like a ship's rigging. Yes, it is sea, a sea not named on maps, alive with creatures made in its image and likeness. The sea where men and animals sink, and where the sun and moon are born, each in its own way. I know beyond all doubt it is sea, and I too am inside its spell, like the rider, like the young bull, like heron and parrot, like palm and snake and monkey, like the water coursing its grassy entrails. This is the sea, and now I can never forget its lessons of sun and solitude, its daily toil, destroying and creating, its mighty surges of heat, of death and life, its green storms, its calm times, and its vegetable dreaming, the calls, symphonies even, of its animals. Sea of the great plain, I am coming back to you, because my fate as a sailor of the earth tells me that here I shall keep some day my tryst with water. Thank you.
Thank you very much to David, to Bob, to Deb and to Adam. The book is so well launched. What more can a poet in Melbourne ask for? Then there are copies of the book over there for sale at the back of the room. Please have a drink, have some food, catch up, and in about half an hour we're just going to hear from two poets who are going to read their poems to us, Rahid and Tatiana. But please, friends, have a drink, catch up, say hello, and we'll be back in about half an hour.